Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today we're discussing the Netflix phenomenon, The Black Book, a fictional story that connects the forgotten past to the ruthless present. So courtesy of Nollywood, The Black Book follows Mofe-Damijo, a retired hitman whose son is senselessly killed and framed for a crime he did not commit. To clear his son's name, Paul goes on a vicious rampage, not just to avenge his child, but to come to terms with his very seedy past. The Black Book is being called Nollywood's first Netflix runaway hit, with nearly 5.6 million views in 48 hours, appealing to audiences not just in Africa, but around the world. So traditionally, Nollywood films have not been that popular outside of Africa, and this is because they tended to be very low budget endeavors with themes that were overly theatrical and moralistic. The movie stars Nollywood veteran Richard Mofe-Damijo as Mofe-Damijo and Ade Lowe as a budding journalist doing her best to pursue justice for all the young men like Paul's son who were senselessly killed and framed for crimes they did not commit. The Black Book is directed by Aditi Effiong, whose previous two films, Up North and The Setup, were licensed by Netflix, and this movie overall took about 4 years to make, and this is because of COVID-19. Though this film has been compared to John Wick and Mofe-Damijo to Liam Neeson in Taken, the filmmaker went through great lengths to make sure that the film felt and looked very Nigerian. So the Black Book avoids replicating extreme Hollywood action sequences and instead makes references to Nigerian history in the 80s and 90s that may be lost on audiences, specifically the existence of these assassination squads that people in power would use to get rid of individuals that they simply did not like. Personally, I was thoroughly entertained and very pleasantly surprised by The Black Book. I felt it did a good job of being entertaining while at the same time discussing Nigeria's history with military dictatorships, drug trafficking, and corrupt politics. Starting with what I liked, the film explores many themes, the most impactful being how the sins of the father are visited upon the son. So Mofe-Damijo is a retired hitman whose life gets turned upside down when his son is suddenly killed, and worse, framed for a crime he did not commit. And although we don't spend a lot of time with them as father and son, the movie does a good job of building their emotional bond, so his impact is felt. And another theme that the movie explores very well is this relationship between victim and perpetrator, specifically how someone can be both victim and perpetrator at the same time. Paul's son did not deserve to die, and yet Paul accepts his son's death as kind of a retribution for all the horrible crimes he has committed in his past. So ironically, the same people who killed his son are the same people who he helped maintain power and generate wealth. And the more that we learn about Paul, the more conflicted that we become. Even though Paul is clearly someone who has turned his life around, a lot of the crimes he committed still haunts his victims to this day. He's killed God knows how many sons, God knows how many fathers, and what's worse is those deaths were never accounted for, right? Paul is clearly someone that got away with a lot of the things that he did. And although the movie isn't based on a true story, this issue of delayed justice is something that Nigerians know all too well. So for example, in 2020, many youth in Nigeria took to the streets to protest against police brutality, to only then be killed by authorities. This movement, known as End SARS, SARS referring to the Special Anti-Robbery Squad, ended up really causing the deaths of many youth. Deaths to this day, like their families never really received justice because they didn't really have the resources and the means. And that's what makes Paul's character very unique. Like, he's an ex-hitman. So he's kind of in a position that many families only wish they could be in a position to do, right? It's one thing to actually have the law on your side. It's another thing to actually have the tools to go out and seek revenge. And as you can see through Paul's journey, like, because so many of these deaths go unaccounted for, like, Paul really knocks on every door until he kind of realizes, you know what, like, I got to go back to the old Paul in order to really get the justice that I'm looking for. And a lot of the reason for that is that people are actively discouraged in pursuing justice in fear of retaliation, something that Paul is clearly not afraid of. So in the movie, Vic, a journalist who unknowingly works at a corrupt newspaper, represents that sort of optimism and that sort of voice hoping to pursue justice for young men like Paul's son, who are senselessly killed and whose deaths go unaccounted for every day. One of the things the movie does so well is utilize costuming and colors to really show, to sort of like illustrate this point. Like Paul at the beginning of the film really does look like a deacon, a father. He looks like an ordinary helpless man. Like that's the thing, before you kind of clock who he is, you really feel bad for him. You're like, oh my God, who's gonna help this poor man? And you know, you're kind of hoping this journalist can, because it doesn't seem like Paul has the means. And as the movie goes on, he starts wearing short sleeves, I think combat boots. Like he just starts to go back to the old Paul to get the job done. And the same could be said for Vic, right? In the beginning, she has this bounce to her step, like a skip in her step. She's very vibrant, like her jewelry, the colors. But as the movie goes on, she gets increasingly muted, right? She doesn't look as bright and optimistic as she did at the start of the film. And that's just not only in her attitude, but in her attire as well. And again, this is because she's becoming less and less naive in terms of what it will actually take to tackle corruption in Nigeria. The dynamic between Paul and Vic spoke to a few things. The first being how good people can easily be turned into villains if given the right circumstances. The Black Book doesn't give us a traditional hero. Like Paul is not, I mean, there are people in this movie that are less worse than others. And in a society where the laws are not really regarded and justice is very hard to procure for ordinary civilians, the only thing you can really do is speak up, essentially. So Vic's editor tries to silence her under the guise of protecting her, but really it's to protect herself. Paul tries to silence Vic in hopes of protecting her, but again, he just doesn't want to deal with, you know, the drama that comes with having to look after somebody else. And the people that Paul is trying to kill want to kill him to protect their own position and to protect their own wealth. And in all these cases, the inability to kind of bring things into the light and actually discuss them is what's causing all this trauma. I think the villain in this movie really is silence and people's sort of inability to stop burying things, you know, deep beneath the ground. So all these characters have done something to greatly compromise their integrity, but that doesn't mean they're beyond redemption. And I think that's why people were able to connect with this movie all around the world. And what the Black Book does extraordinarily well is balance authenticity with simplicity. Like it's a very simple story. It's very easy to follow. And yet it's very authentic in how it addresses Nigeria's past with these sort of military regimes that would kill people and what implications this has had to present day, right? So a lot of these things are still happening, and in a way they're a lot worse today than they were in the past, right? They've almost been normalized in some way. Okay, so what does the Black Book success mean for Netflix and for Nollywood in general? So briefly, Netflix entered the Nigerian market in 2020. And since then, it's had many ups and downs. It's even gone as far as to invest in original content. But the problem was that instead of sort of inspiring this creative boom, a lot of the things that Netflix was producing wasn't all that different to previous Nollywood films. They just had like a higher production value. In addition to this, reports have shown that Nigerian filmmakers actually get paid a lot less in comparison to their counterparts around the world, even though they clearly have a bigger market. So hopefully the success of Black Book will mean not only more Nollywood movies being produced for higher budgets. The production value on the Black Book was awesome. Like they really went above and beyond. Like it was just quality. Like again, I highly recommend it. And I think the most important thing that could come out of this is that people are gonna, you know, seek these films on their own. So with that being said, you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.